Jake had never believed in ghost stories. He had grown up on horror movies and urban legends, but they were just that, stories. So, when his friend Mark offered him the keys to Come, his family's old hunting cabin, for a weekend getaway, he accepted without hesitation. A little solitude, a break from work, and the quiet of the deep woods sounded perfect. The drive took longer than expected. The road was narrow, winding, and seemed to stretch on forever. Trees loomed on either side, their gnarled branches intertwining overhead, blocking out most of the late afternoon sun. By the time dusk had fallen, the cabin was a simple wooden structure, weathered and worn, standing alone in a clearing. As he stepped inside, the air smelled stale, like damp wood and something faintly metallic. A single bulb flickered when he pulled the light chain, casting weak yellow light across the sparse furnishings. A small kitchen, a battered old couch, and a single bed in the back room. The first night was uneventful. The wind howled through and something scratched, but he dismissed it as branches or animals. It wasn't until he woke in the middle of the night that he began to feel uneasy. A sound, a whisper. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he heard it again, though, barely audible. Levino. Jake sat up, heart pounding. He grabbed his phone, but there was no signal. He listened, holding his breath. Silence. Maybe he had imagined it. With a nervous chuckle, he lay back down and forced himself to sleep. The second night was worse. The whispering returned, but this time it wasn't a single voice. It was several overlapping, murmuring, their words unintelligible. He turned on the cabin's lone lamp, but the light barely reached the corners of the room. His skin prickled. The whispering stopped. Then thump. Something heavy hit the floor in the other room. Jake's pulse skyrocketed. He crept toward the bedroom, holding his breath. The bed was empty. He swallowed hard and reached out, pushing it open. Then something in the shadows moved. Jake staggered back as a face emerged, a pale, twisted thing with hollow black eyes and a gaping mouth, whispering so fast it sounded like a swarm of voices. The whispering grew louder. "Thou shalt not bear." Jake ran. He didn't stop to grab his bag. Rising into a deafening chorus, he reached his car, fumbling for the keys. As he started the engine, he glanced back at the cabin. The door was wide open, and standing in the doorway was the figuracci, waiting. Jake didn't wait to see what it would do next. He peeled out. Days later, Mark called. "You left in a hurry, man. Everything okay?" Jake hesitated, unsure how to explain. There was something there, he finally said. In the closet, silence. Then Mark spoke, his voice uneasy. "Jackethed cabin doesn't have a closet." The line went dead. Ethan had been driving for hours when the storm rolled in. Sheets of rain pounded his windshield, and the winding mountain road became treacherous. His GPS flickered and died, leaving him with no sense of direction. He cursed under his breath. Just his luck lost in the middle of nowhere, with barely any gas left. That's when he saw it, a small cabin nestled among the trees, its windows dark except for the faint flicker of a fireplace inside. Relief washed over him. He didn't care if it belonged to a stranger. He just needed shelter until the storm passed. Pulling up beside the cabin, he killed the engine and grabbed his backpack. Rain soaked through his jacket as he hurried to the front door. He knocked. No answer. Lightning flashed, illuminating the porch. A wooden sign above the door read Grayson Cabin. It looked old, like no one had lived here for years, but the fireplace inside told a different story. He knocked again, louder this time. "Hello?" Nothing. The door creaked open at his touch. Inside, the air was stale. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan's head snapped up. The branch? He turned his gaze toward the glass. A pale face stared back at him. His breath caught. The figure was outside, pressed against the window. Its skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Hollow, black eyes, a grin too wide for a human mouth. Then it vanished. Ethan jolted upright, heart hammering. What the hell was that? His skin crawled. Cautiously, he crept toward the window, peering out. Rain lashed against the glass, and the forest beyond was nothing but a wall of shadows. No footprints, no sign of movement, just his imagination, he told himself. He was exhausted, cold, and his mind was playing tricks on him. He turned away. Tap, tap, tap. This time, the sound came from the window beside the fireplace. Ethan whipped around. Nothing. The fire flickered violently, casting shifting shadows along the walls. The air grew colder. His breath misted in front of him. Then, from behind him, a whisper, "Let me in." Ethan spun. The front door was open. Rain and wind howled through the entrance. His stomach twisted as his eyes darted to the floor. Wet footprints trailed inside. He reached for his bag, his fingers trembling. He had a pocket knife, more useless, but it was something. He backed toward the door, his pulse hammering against his skull. The floorboard creaked. The footprints led toward the hallway. Someone was inside with him. He swallowed hard. Who's there? Silence. The door to the bedroom at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar. Darkness yawned beyond it. Ethan took a step forward, his breathing shallow. If someone was hiding in there, he needed to know. Another step. The floor groaned beneath him. Another. He reached the door, his fingers shaking as he pushed it open. The room was empty, except for the open closet door. Ethan's breath hitched. He could see the shape of something standing inside that door, unmoving, just out of the light. His fingers tightened around his knife. Lightning flashed. For a split second, the closet was illuminated. Something was in there. It lunged. Ethan barely had time to react before the door slammed shut on its own, rattling violently against its frame. He stumbled backward, his heart in his throat. The fire in the other room died instantly, plunging the cabin into darkness. And then, tap, tap. Not just from the window, the sound came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. Like fingernails scratching from the inside, Ethan bolted. He grabbed his bag and sprinted for the front door, slipping on the wet floor as he tore outside into the storm. The rain was deafening, but he didn't care. He ran to his car, yanked the door open, and fumbled for the keys. His fingers jammed them into the ignition. The engine sputtered, and then he saw it in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat, smiling. The last thing Ethan heard before the lights cut out. Tap, tap, tap. Jason and Emily needed a break, a weekend away from city stress. A remote cabin in the woods seemed perfect. The place was old but cozy, with a stone fireplace and wooden beams that groaned in the wind. A guest book sat on the mantel. Emily flipped through it, her fingers pausing on the last entry to not listen to the whispers. She frowned. That's weird. That night, as the fire crackled, Jason awoke to a soft murmur, a voice barely above a breath. "Emily?" He whispered, but she was asleep beside him. The voice came again, from the dark corner of the room. Jason's skin prickled. He reached for the lantern and shone it toward the sound. Nothing, just the empty chair. The whispering grew louder. Emily stirred, eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" The voice became clearer now, multiple voices, overlapping in a frantic chant. The walls seemed to breathe. The floorboards trembled. Then silence. Jason grabbed Emily's hand. "We're leaving." But when they opened the cabin door, the forest had changed. The trees were twisted, roots clawing through the dirt like fingers. The path they came from was gone. Behind them, the whispers started again, closer this time, and from the darkness, something whispered their names.